How are you guys doing? Today is Monday, January 4th, 2021, out here in this quarantine. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to walk you through all of the individual stats leaders as the 2020 season has come to a close, especially with all the Week 17 games being played yesterday. The only games that are left to play are the playoff matchups that are elimination. As soon as someone loses, they're out. But for the 16 games and 17 weeks that everyone played together, I think it's pretty good to look back on who led the league in each stat, especially as I've been following it along every other week this season. Starting with the passing stats, looking out into who's leading the league in passing yards, the league leader for the 2020-21 NFL season this year was Deshaun Watson, the elite starting quarterback from the Houston Texans, who threw for 4,823 yards in 16 games. The runner-up this year was Patrick Mahomes, the elite quarterback from Kansas City and the reigning Super Bowl MVP, who finished with 4,740 yards in 15 games. So just for the record, that is 83 less yards than Deshaun Watson in one less game. Third place in the NFL would be Tom Brady, the GOATed quarterback for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who finished with 4,633 passing yards in 16 games. Fourth in the league was Matt Ryan, the elite starting quarterback from the Atlanta Falcons, who finished with 4,581 passing yards in 16 games. And then fifth in the league was Josh Allen, the elite starting quarterback for the Buffalo Bills, who threw for 4,544 passing yards this season in 16 games. Sixth in the league in passing yards was Justin Herbert, the rookie elite starting quarterback for the Los Angeles Chargers, who finished with 4,336 passing yards in 15 games, which was an NFL rookie record that he broke this year. Seventh in the league was Aaron Rodgers, the GOATed starting quarterback for the Green Bay Packers, who finished with 4,299 passing yards in 16 games. Eighth in the league was Kirk Cousins, the starting quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings, who finished with 4,265 yards. Ninth in the league was Russell Wilson, the elite starting quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks, who finished with 4,212 passing yards on the season. And then 10th in the season was Phillip Rivers, the starting quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts, who finished with 4,169 yards in 16 games this season. Looking at the completion percentage leaders out of the starting quarterbacks, first was Aaron Rodgers, the GOATed starting quarterback for the Green Bay Packers, who completed 70.7% of his passes. Second in the league was Drew Brees, the GOATed starting quarterback for the New Orleans Saints, who completed 70.5% of his pass attempts in 12 games. Because, of course, he was hurt. He had a punctured lung, so he was out for a month. Third in the league in completion percentage was Deshaun Watson, the elite starting quarterback for the Houston Texans, who completed 70.2% of his passes. Fourth in the league was Josh Allen, the elite starting quarterback for the Buffalo Bills, who completed 69.2% of his passes. Fifth in the league is Teddy Bridgewater, the starting quarterback for the Carolina Panthers, who completed 69.1% of his passes. Sixth in the league is Russell Wilson, the elite starting quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks, who completed 68.8% of his passes, en route to the Seahawks making the playoffs this year. Seventh in the league was Ryan Fitzpatrick, the starting quarterback for Miami for about half the season, who completed 68.5% of his passes. Eighth in the league was Phillip Rivers, the starting quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts, who completed 68% of his passes to get the Colts back to the playoffs. Ninth in the league was Kirk Cousins of the Minnesota Vikings, who completed 67.6% of his passes. And 10th in the league was Derek Carr, the Las Vegas Raiders, who completed 67.3% of his passes in 16 games. And then looking at who led the league in passing touchdowns this year, starting from the top, the league leader was Aaron Rodgers, the GOATed starting quarterback for the Green Bay Packers. He's the only quarterback in NFL history to have multiple seasons throwing for at least 45 touchdowns. He did so as well in his MVP season in 2011. Against those 48 touchdowns, he only had 5 interceptions. Second in the league in passing touchdowns, tied for the second, should I say, was Tom Brady, the GOATed starting quarterback for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and Russell Wilson, the elite starting quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks, as both quarterbacks threw for 40 touchdowns apiece this season. And fourth was Patrick Mahomes, the elite starting quarterback of the Kansas City Chiefs, who threw for 38 touchdowns and 6 picks in 15 games. Going back to Brady and Wilson, Brady had 12 interceptions on the season as Wilson had 13. Both played 16 games. Not crazy interception numbers, but still, both of them still threw for 40 touchdowns. Fifth in the league in passing touchdowns was Josh Allen, the elite starting quarterback for the Buffalo Bills, who completed 37 touchdown passes and 10 interceptions this season in 16 games. Sixth in the league was Kirk Cousins of the Minnesota Vikings, who threw for 35 touchdowns against 13 interceptions this season. And then tied for seventh was Ben Roethlisberger with 33 touchdowns on the season. You have Ben Roethlisberger, who also had 10 interceptions. And then you had Ryan Tannehill, the starting quarterback for the Titans, who threw for 33 touchdowns and 7 interceptions, and Deshaun Watson, the elite starting quarterback for the Houston Texans, who also threw 33 touchdowns against 7 interceptions. And then 10th in the league this season was Justin Herbert, the elite rookie quarterback for the Los Angeles Chargers, who threw for 31 touchdowns against 10 interceptions this season to help help out the Chargers in the best way that he could with all the injuries that the Chargers had. Looking at the league leaders in passing interceptions thrown, the two leaders were Carson Wentz, the starting quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles, and Drew Lock of the Denver Broncos. Wentz threw 15 interceptions in 12 games, and Drew Lock threw 15 interceptions in 13 games. Second in the league, or tied for second in the league, you have Kirk Cousins, the starting quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings, Jared Goff, the starting quarterback for the Los Angeles Rams, and you have Russell Wilson, the elite starting quarterback from the Seattle Seahawks. All three quarterbacks threw for 13 interceptions this season. Goff threw it against 20 interceptions, Kirk Cousins threw it against 35, and Russell Wilson threw it against 40. And then sixth in the league, or tied for sixth in the league with 12 interceptions, you have Tom Brady, the goated quarterback from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Kyler Murray, the elite starting quarterback for the Arizona Cardinals, and Nick Mullins, the starting quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers for 10 games. He threw 12 and 10. Well, Murray and Brady threw 12 in their 16. And then eighth in the league, tied for eighth, would be starting quarterback Phillip Rivers, elite starting quarterback Matt Ryan, and starting quarterbacks Bridgewater of the Panthers and Sam Darnold of the Jets. They each threw 11 interceptions this season. For Phillip Rivers, he threw it against 24 touchdowns. Matt Ryan threw his 11 against 26. Bridgewater threw his 11 interceptions against 5 touchdowns, and then Sam Darnold had 9 touchdowns to go with his 11 interceptions in 12 games played this season. And then looking at who's been sacked the most times this season, the sack leader in terms of quarterback from the quarterback side was Carson Wentz of the Philadelphia Eagles. He was sacked 50 times this year. Second in the league was Deshaun Watson from the elite starting quarterback from the Houston Texans, who was sacked 49 times in 16 games, averaging 4 sacks a game. Third in the league was the elite starting quarterback Russell Wilson of the Seattle Seahawks. He got sacked 47 times. Fourth in the league was Daniel Jones, the starting quarterback for the New York Giants, who got sacked 45 times. Fifth in the league was Matt Ryan, the elite starting quarterback of the Atlanta Falcons, who was sacked 41 times. Sixth in the league was Kirk Cousins of the Minnesota Vikings, who was sacked 39. Seventh was Matthew Stafford of the Detroit Lions, who was sacked 38 times. Eighth was Sam Darnold of the New York Jets, who was sacked 35 times in 12 games. And then tied for ninth in the league in time sacked was Joe Burrow, the reigning number 1 pick from the 2020 NFL draft. And then Justin Herbert, the elite rookie starting quarterback from that same draft, who both quarterbacks were sacked 32 times this season. Burrow was sacked 32 times in 10 games, whereas Herbert was sacked 32 times over 15 games. Looking at the rushing leaders for this season, starting off with just rushing attempts, in terms of carries, Derrick Henry led the league in carries. He had 378 carries this season in 16 games. Second in the league was Dalvin Cook, the elite starting quarterback for the elite starting running back for the Minnesota Vikings, who had 312 carries on this season. Third in the league was Josh Jacobs, the elite starting running back of the Las Vegas Raiders, who had 273 carries this season. Fourth in the league was David Montgomery of the Chicago Bears, who had 247 carries. Fifth in the league was Ezekiel Elliott, the elite starting running back of the Dallas Cowboys, as he had 244 carries, as he had 979 yards on the season. Sixth in the league was James Robinson, the elite rookie running back for the Jacksonville Jaguars, who finished with 240 carries on the season. Seventh in the league was Kenyon Drake, the starting running back for the Arizona Cardinals, who finished with 239 carries. Eighth in the league was Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts with 232. Ninth in the league was Melvin Gordon of the Denver Broncos with 215. And the 10th and the last player in the NFL with 200 carries this season was Aaron Jones, the elite starting running back of the Green Bay Packers. Looking at to how they did yardage-wise, the league leader in yards was Derrick Henry, who was also the league leader in carries, who had 2,027 yards, and for the first time in his career, he broke 2,000 rushing yards in one season, as he was able to put the Tennessee Titans on his back and lift them and wheel them into yet another playoff series. Second in the league was Dalvin Cook, the elite starting running back for the Minnesota Vikings, who finished with 1,557 yards in 14 games, averaging 111 yards per game. Derrick Henry and Dalvin Cook were the only two players in football that averaged triple-digit yards per game, so just great seasons from both of them. Third in the league was Jonathan Taylor, the starting running back for the Indianapolis Colts, who finished with 1,169 yards on 232 carries in 15 games. Fourth in the league was Aaron Jones, the elite starting running back for the Green Bay Packers, who finished with 1,104 rushing yards this season in 14 games. Fifth in the league, tied for fifth in the league with 1,070 yards on the season, would be David Montgomery, the starting running back for the Chicago Bears, and James Robinson, the elite starting running back for the Jacksonville Jaguars, as Montgomery did it in 15 games and James Robinson did it in 14 games. Seventh in the league is Nick Chubb, the elite starting running back for the Cleveland Browns, who finished with 1,067 yards on the season. Eighth in the league would be Josh Jacobs, the elite starting running back for the Las Vegas Raiders, who finished with 1,065 rushing yards this season. Ninth in the league is Lamar Jackson, the elite starting quarterback for the Baltimore Ravens. He's the first quarterback in NFL history to have back-to-back 1,000-yard rushing seasons, as he finished with 1,005 yards on the season. And then 10th in the league would be Melvin Gordon, the third, the starting running back for the Denver Broncos, who finished with 986 yards on the season. Lamar Jackson finished out as the ninth player in the league to finish with 1,000, and Derrick Henry was the only player to finish with 2,000 on the season. The longest rush this season would go to Ronald Jones II of Tampa Bay, as his went 98 yards. Derrick Henry had the only other 90-yard touchdown this year. It was 94 yards, and then I'll just go through the 80 yards or the 80-yard carries. Third in the league was the third longest run in the NFL this season was by Miles Sanders of the Philadelphia Eagles, who ran for 82 yards. Raheem Mostert from San Francisco, Daniel Jones from the New York Giants, and David Montgomery from Chicago all had 80-yard rushes this season, which was good enough to tie them for fourth in the end. Looking at rushing plays of 20 yards or more, the leader was Derrick Henry, the elite starting running back of the Tennessee Titans. He had 16 of them in 16 games. Second in the league was Nick Chubb, the elite starting running back for the Cleveland Browns, as he had 12 of them in 12 games. Third in the league was Lamar Jackson, the elite starting quarterback of the Baltimore Ravens, as he had 10 rushes of 20 yards or more, which is very impressive for an NFL quarterback. Fourth in the league, tied for fourth in the league, was Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins of the Baltimore Ravens, as both had 8 this season. Edwards did it in 16 games, whereas Dobbins did it in 15. Sixth in the league, or tied for sixth in the league, you have Alvin Kamara, the elite starting running back for the New Orleans Saints, Kyler Murray, the elite starting quarterback of the Arizona Cardinals, and Jonathan Taylor, the starting running back of the Indianapolis Colts, as they each had 7 big runs this season. And then tied for ninth in the league with 6 of them, you have Russell Wilson, the elite starting quarterback of the Seattle Seahawks. You have Dalvin Cook, the elite starting running back of the Minnesota Vikings, Kenyon Drake, the starting running back of the Arizona Cardinals, Aaron Jones, the elite starting running back of the Green Bay Packers, Phillip Lindsay, the starting running back of the Denver Broncos, and Ronald Jones II, the starting running back of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They each have 6 on the season. And jumping into rushing touchdowns for the season, the league leader for the 2020 NFL season in rushing touchdowns was Derrick Henry, the elite starting running back of the Tennessee Titans. He is the only player he's the first player in a while to lead the league in rushing attempts, rushing yards, and rushing touchdowns. And, of course, he's having yet another monster year to put in his resume. Second in the league, or tied for second in the league, should I say, with 16 rushing touchdowns on the season, were Alvin Kamara, the elite starting running back of the Saints, who ended up getting 6 in one game in week 15, I want to say. He did in 15, and Dalvin Cook, the elite starting running back of the Minnesota Vikings, put up 16 in 14 games. Tied for fourth in the league with 12 rushing touchdowns on the season, you have Cam Newton, the starting quarterback for the New England Patriots, that did it in 15, along with Josh Jacobs, who also had 12 rushing touchdowns in 15 games for the Las Vegas Raiders, and then Nick Chubb, the elite starting running back for the Cleveland Browns, who put up 12 rushing touchdowns in 12 games played. And then tied for 7th in the league with 11, you have Kyler Murray, the elite starting quarterback for the Arizona Cardinals, Jonathan Taylor, the starting running back for the Indianapolis Colts, and Antonio Gibson, the starting running back for the Washington Redskins. They each put up 11. And then 10th in the league in rushing touchdowns with 10 rushing touchdowns was Kenyon Drake, the starting running back for the Arizona Cardinals, who would end up putting up 995 yards in addition to that on that season, to help the Arizona Cardinals put up a pretty good season and would see their season fall just short of the playoffs. And then looking at to who lost the most or who fumbled the most in this league, Taysom Hill, the Swiss Army knife of the New Orleans Saints, fumbled 7 times this season, which was the most. He lost 3 of them. Jalen Hurts, the starting quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles, at the end of the season, who played 15 games, ended up fumbling the most. He had 6 fumbles this season, and then tied for 3rd with 5 fumbles. You have Cam Newton from the New England Patriots, Ezekiel Elliott, the elite running back from the Dallas Cowboys, Lamar Jackson, the elite starting quarterback from the Baltimore Ravens, and Kyler Murray, the elite starting quarterback for the Arizona Cardinals. And looking at the receiving statistical leaderboards, starting with receptions, the league leader in receptions for the 2020 NFL season was Stephon Diggs, the elite starting wide receiver for the Buffalo Bills. He had 127 of them. Second in the league was DeAndre Hopkins, the elite starting wide receiver for the Arizona Cardinals, who had 115 receptions in 16 games. And tied with him was Devontae Adams, the elite wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers, who also had 115 receptions in 2 less games. He did it in 14. Finishing in 4th for the 2020 season, Darren Waller was the starting tight end for the Las Vegas Raiders. He had 107 receptions in 16 games. 5th in the league was Travis Kelce, the elite starting tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs, who had 105 receptions in 15 games. 6th in the league was Allen Robinson II, the starting wide receiver for the Chicago Bears, who finished with 102 receptions in 16 games. And then tied for 7th and the last players with 100 receptions in a season, you had Keenan Allen, who had 114 games, the elite starting wide receiver for the Los Angeles Chargers, and Tyler Lockett, the starting wide receiver for the Seattle Seahawks, as Lockett put up 100 receptions in 16 games. Finishing 9th in the league was Juju Smith-Schuster, the starting wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers, who had 97 receptions in 16 games. And then finishing 10th in the league was Robbie Anderson of the Carolina Panthers, who had 95 receptions in 16 games. Looking at who led the league in targets, because I think that's an interesting stat. Stephon Diggs led the league in targets. He had 166 of them, the elite wide receiver from the Buffalo Bills. DeAndre Hopkins, the elite wide receiver for the Arizona Cardinals, was 2nd with 160 of them on the season. Allen Robinson II of the Chicago Bears finished 3rd in wide receiver targets with 151 of them in 16 games. Devontae Adams, the elite wide receiver of the Green Bay Packers, finished 4th with 149 targets. And Keenan Allen, the elite wide receiver from the Los Angeles Chargers, finished 5th with 147 targets in 14 games. Looking at who led the league in receiving yards this season, the league leader in receiving yards for the 2020-21 NFL football season was Stephon Diggs, the elite starting wide receiver for the Buffalo Bills, who finished with 1,535 on the season. Second in the league was Travis Kelce, who finished with 1,416 receiving yards in 15 games. He more than likely could have taken the receiving yards record, but the Kansas City Chiefs had a bye week early, but still Stephon Diggs holds the crown in receptions and receiving yards. Third in the league was DeAndre Hopkins, the elite starting wide receiver for the Arizona Cardinals, who finished with 1,407 yards on the season in 16 games. Fourth in the league was Justin Jefferson, the elite starting wide receiver for the Minnesota Vikings, who set a single season record in Vikings history with the most receiving yards in a rookie season. He's on his way to doing great things. Fifth in the league, or tied for 5th in the league, should I say, with 1,374 yards was Devontae Adams, who did it in 14 games, the elite starting wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers, and Calvin Ridley, the starting wide receiver for the Atlanta Falcons, who did so in 15 games. 7th in the league was DK Metcalf, the elite starting wide receiver for the Seattle Seahawks, who had 1,303 yards and 83 receptions in 16 games. 8th in the league was Tyreek Hill, the elite starting wide receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs, who had 1,276 receiving yards on 87 receptions in 15 games. 9th in the league was Allen Robinson II, the starting wide receiver for the Chicago Bears, who finished with 1,250 receiving yards and 102 receptions in 16 games. And then 10th in the league was Darren Waller, the tight end for the Las Vegas Raiders, who had 1,196 yards on 107 receptions in 16 games this year, as two tight ends finished in the top 10 in receiving yards this season. It would come out to finish out, or there would be 18 receivers that would finish with 1,000 receiving yards on the season, among which are, one of them being Mike Evans, the elite wide receiver for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and another one being Amari Cooper, the elite wide receiver for the Dallas Cowboys. Looking at who led the league in receiving touchdowns this year, the league leader in receiving touchdowns for the 2020 NFL season was Davante Adams, the elite wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers. He finished with 18 of them in 14 games. Second in the league was Tyreek Hill, the elite starting wide receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs, who had 15 of them in 15 games. Third was Adam Thielen, the starting wide receiver for the Minnesota Vikings, who had 14 of them in 15 games. Fourth in the league was Mike Evans, the elite starting wide receiver for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who had 13 receiving touchdowns in 16 games. Tied for fifth with 11, you have Travis Kelce, the elite tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs, Robert Tonyan, the starting tight end for the Green Bay Packers, and A.J. Brown, the starting wide receiver for the Tennessee Titans. Tonyan did it in 16 games, Travis Kelce did it in 15 games, and A.J. Brown had 11 touchdowns in 14 games. Eighth in the league, tied with 10 touchdowns in the league. It was Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, both starting wide receivers of the Seattle Seahawks, as they both did it in 16 games. And then tied for 10th with 9 touchdowns on the season, it was Marvin Jones Jr., the starting wide receiver for the Detroit Lions, Darren Waller, the starting tight end for the Oakland Raiders, Juju Smith-Schuster, the starting wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Calvin Ridley, the starting wide receiver for the Atlanta Falcons, and Chase Claypool, the starting wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers. The longest reception will go to Jerry Jeudy this season. He had a 92-yard reception this year. Second longest went to Nelson Aguilar of the Las Vegas Raiders, who had an 85-yarder. Chase Claypool of the Pittsburgh Steelers had the third longest at the end of the season with 84. Fourth in the league was Deshaun Jackson of the Philadelphia Eagles, who finished with an 81-yard reception, even though he played 5 games. And Christian Kirk of the Arizona Cardinals finished with an 80-yard reception in the season, as there were only 5 receptions this season of 80 yards or longer. Looking at big plays, receptions of 20 yards or more, the leader in that stat, there was a 3-way tie between Travis Kelce, the elite starting tight end of the Kansas City Chiefs, Justin Jefferson, the elite rookie starting wide receiver for the Minnesota Vikings, and Calvin Ridley, the starting wide receiver for the Atlanta Falcons. Each of them had 23 big plays, which consist of plays of 20 yards or more. Second in the league was Allen Robinson of the Chicago Bears, who had 22 of them. Third in the league, tied for fifth in the league with 20 of them was Brandon Cooks, the starting wide receiver for the Houston Texans, Mike Evans, the elite starting wide receiver for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and Stephon Diggs, the elite starting wide receiver of the Buffalo Bills, alongside Tyreek Hill, the elite starting wide receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs, as they all had 20 receptions of 20 yards or more, which made it 8 players this season that had at least 20 receptions of 20 yards or more. Finishing 9th in the league, tied for 9th with 19, it was Marvin Jones Jr. of the Detroit Lions, and DJ Moore of the Carolina Panthers both had 19 on the season. And then looking on the defensive side of the ball, the current leaders in tackles for the entire season would be Zach Cunningham of the Houston Texans. He'd have 164 on the season. Second in the league would be Jalen Smith of the Dallas Cowboys. He'd have 154. Third would be Blake Martinez, the starting linebacker for the New York Giants, who'd finish with 151 of them. Fourth would be Joe Schobert, the starting linebacker for the Jacksonville Jaguars, who finished fourth with 151. Fifth would be Devin White, the young linebacker for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who finished with 140. Fifth would be Roquan Smith, the starting linebacker for the Chicago Bears, who had 139. Seventh would be Bobby Wagner, the elite starting linebacker for the Seattle Seahawks, who finished with 138. Eighth would be Neville Hewitt of the New York Jets, who finished with 134. Ninth would be Darius Leonard, the elite linebacker for the Indianapolis Colts, with 132. And tied for 10th, it would be Fred Warner of the San Francisco Giants and Tyrell Adams, linebacker for the Houston Texans. The leading tackler among DBs was Jordan Poyer, who finished 11th in the league, tied with Alexander Johnson of the Broncos. But Jordan Poyer finished with 124 tackles in 16 games for the Buffalo Bills. Looking at the sack leaders, on the season. The 2020 NFL sacks leader would be T.J. Watt, who would be the second player in his family to do so, behind, of course, J.J., but of course, this would be the first time that he ever does it, and T.J. Watt continuing to show the league that he himself is a very dangerous individual, in addition to his last name being Watt. Second in the league would be Aaron Donald, the goated defensive tackle of the Los Angeles Rams, tied with Trey Hendrickson, the starting defensive end of the New Orleans Saints. Both would finish with 13.5 sacks on the season. Trey Hendrickson did it in 15 games, whereas Aaron Donald did it in 16. Tied for fourth with 12.5 sacks, you have Hassan Riddick of the starting linebacker for the Arizona Cardinals, and Zadarius Smith, the elite starting linebacker for the Green Bay Packers, who both had 12.5 on the season. Finishing sixth this year will be Myles Garrett, the elite starting defensive end for the Cleveland Browns, who finished with 12 sacks in 14 games. Finishing seventh was Leonard Williams, the starting defensive end for the New York Giants, who had 11.5 this season. Eighth in the league will be Stephon Tuitt, the starting defensive end for the Pittsburgh Steelers, who had 11 of them in 15 games. Ninth in the league will be Leonard Floyd, the starting linebacker for the Los Angeles Rams, who had 10.5 sacks in 16 games, and finishing 10th in the league with 10 sacks. Yes, there were 10 players in the NFL who had double-digit sacks this year. It will be Romeo Okwara, the starting defensive end for the Detroit Lions this season. Looking at leaders in tackles for loss, the leader would be T.J. Watt, the elite starting linebacker for the Pittsburgh Steelers, who finished with 26 of them. Tied for second in the league with 20 would be Hassan Riddick of the Arizona Cardinals, and Aaron Donald of the goated defensive tackle for the LA Rams, as both of them had 20 tackles for loss in 16 games. Finishing fourth in the league was Roquan Smith, or tied with Devin White at least, as they both had 18 total tackles for loss on the season, and 16 games for Roquan Smith and 15 games for Devin White. Finishing sixth in the league with 17 tackles for loss was Zadarius Smith, the elite linebacker for the Green Bay Packers. He had 17 of them in 16 games. Tied for seventh, you had Leonard Williams, the starting defensive end of the New York Giants. He was tied with J.J. Watt, the goated defensive end for the Houston Texans, as he had 16 of them in 16 games. Both of them did. And then finishing ninth with 15 of them, it was a tie. It was Brandon Graham of the Philadelphia Eagles, Khalil Mack, the elite linebacker of the Chicago Bears, DeMarcus Lawrence, the starting defensive end for the Dallas Cowboys, and Max Crosby, the starting defensive end for the Las Vegas Raiders, all had 15 tackles for loss in 16 games. Myles Garrett had 15 in 4 games. He's the defensive end for the Cleveland Browns, but they all finished in the top 10 because they all tied for 9th in tackles for loss on the season. Looking at the DB stats, at passes defended, the current leader, the 2020 NFL leader in passes defended was Xavier Howard, the elite starting cornerback for the Miami Dolphins, who finished with 20 passes defended in 16 games. Second in the league, or should I say tied for second in the league, with 18 passes defended in 15 games was James Bradbury of the New York Giants. He tied with Carlton Davis, who had 18 passes defended in 14 games for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And Denzel Ward, the starting corner for the Cleveland Browns, had 18 passes defended in 12 games. Fifth in the league will be Ronald Darby, the starting corner for the Washington football team, who had 16 passes defended in 16 games. Tied for sixth in the league, it would be Jesse Bates III, the starting safety for the Cincinnati Bengals, and Jalen Johnson, the starting corner for the Chicago Bears, as both had 15 passes defended this season, as Jesse Bates III at the most among safeties. Eighth in the league, or tied for eighth with 14 passes defended, you'd find Malcolm Butler, the starting corner for the Tennessee Titans, Michael Davis from the Los Angeles Chargers, J.C. Jackson of the New England Patriots, Trayvon Mullen of the Las Vegas Raiders, Trayvon Diggs of the Dallas Cowboys, and Darius Williams of the Los Angeles Rams. Looking at the leaders in interceptions, the league leader in interceptions for 2020 would be Xavier Howard, the elite starting corner for the Miami Dolphins, who finished with 10 on the season. Second in the league would be J.C. Jackson, the New England Patriots, who had 9. Third in the league would be Tyrann Mathieu, who finished with 6. And then tied for fourth with 5 of them to finish that out, it would be Harrison Smith, the elite safety for the Minnesota Vikings, along with Quandre Diggs of the Seattle Seahawks and Justin Simmons of the Denver Broncos. And looks like the longest interception return of the season would be 90 yards by Budda Baker of the Arizona Cardinals. That would be the play where he would get tackled from behind by DK Metcalf. That would have been the longest touchdown of the season by far. But the second longest interception return was by Troy Hill, the Los Angeles Rams, an 84-yard pick six yesterday. Kenny Young of the Los Angeles Rams had a 79-yarder. Michael Davis of the Chargers had a 78-yarder. And then fifth was Cameron Curl, the starting safety of the Washington Redskins, who had a 76-yarder on the season. And the league leader in pick sixes was Troy Hill, the Los Angeles Rams, who had two of them, which is a very impressive feat at this point, considering what all happened this season. And then looking at the scoring leaders this season, this would have to be a place kicker stat, except there was one player that wasn't a place kicker, and I'll get to him in a second. So tied for first in the league in points scored, you had Daniel Carlson of the Las Vegas Raiders and Jason Sanders of the Miami Dolphins, who had 144 points in 16 games. And tied with them would be Young Hui Ko, the elite starting place kicker of the Atlanta Falcons, who had 144 points in 15 games played. Finishing fourth in the league would be Tyler Bass of the Buffalo Bills, who'd finished with 141 points in 16 games played. Fifth would be Rodrigo Blankenship, who'd finished with 139 in 16 games for the Indianapolis Colts. Sixth in the league would be Ryan Suckup, who would finish with 136 in 16 games for Tampa Bay, a playoff team. Seventh in the league would be Greg the Leg Zuerlein, who would finish with 135 points in 16 games played for the Dallas Cowboys. Eighth in the league would be Justin Tucker, the elite place kicker for the Baltimore Ravens, who'd finish with 130 points in 16 games played. And then tied for ninth, the two place kickers would be Cairo Santos of the Chicago Bears and Will Lutz of the New Orleans Saints, who each had 126 points in 16 games. But tied with them would be Alvin Kamara, the elite running back for the New Orleans Saints, who had 126 points. That's how many touchdowns he had, because he had 16 rushing touchdowns and 5 receiving touchdowns, which is enough for 21 touchdowns on the season, which would be enough for him. And, of course, he finished first, and then Devontae Adams, Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry, and Tyreek Hill would finish out the touchdown list. But Alvin Kamara was the leading scorer among non-kickers, and he was able to finish within the top 10 in terms of scoring points for his team, which is a very impressive feat when it comes down to it. Looking at special teams, starting off with just return, or actually I'm going to start with kicking, just to show you just the most accurate kickers in the league. The most accurate kickers in the league thus far. Mason Crosby from the Green Bay Packers and Jason Myers from the Seattle Seahawks both made 100% of their field goals. Mason Crosby went 16 for 16 in 16 games, and Jason Myers for Seattle went 24 for 24. Finishing second in terms of accuracy was Graham Gano of the New York Giants, who made 31 of his 32 field goal attempts. That's 96.9% accuracy. Fourth in the league was Chris Boswell of the Pittsburgh Steelers, who made 19 of his 20, making 95% of his field goal attempts in 13 games. Fifth in the league was Young Hui Ko of the Atlanta Falcons, who made 37 of his 39 field goal attempts. That was with a 94.9% clip. As he started the season with the most consecutive field goals made in NFL history with 33 of them. Sixth in the league was Daniel Carlson of the Las Vegas Raiders, who made 94.3% of his kicks in 16 games. Seventh in the league was Cairo Santos, who made 93.8% of his kicks in 16 games, made 30 of his 32. Eighth in the league would be Nick Folk, who made 26 of his 28. That would be a 92.9% clip. Ninth in the league was Harrison Butker of the Kansas City Chiefs, the first-round bye team in the AFC, who made 25 of his 27 kicks in 16 games. And 10th in the league would be Jason Sanders of the Miami Dolphins, who'd make 36 of his 39 field goal attempts, which would be good enough for 92.3% of his kicks. The longest field goal this season would go to Jason Myers of the Seattle Seahawks, who made a 61-yarder. The second longest, tied for the second longest, was Matt Prater of the Detroit Lions, Greg Zuerlein of the Dallas Cowboys, Chris Boswell of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and Josh Lambo of the Jacksonville Jaguars. They each made a 59-yarder on the season. And then tied for sixth with a 58-yarder, you had Brandon McManus of the Denver Broncos, Harrison Butker of the Kansas City Chiefs, and Tyler Bass of the Buffalo Bills. Mason Crosby would finish ninth with a 57-yarder, and then tied for 10th, you'd have Zane Gonzalez of the Cardinals, Joey Sly of the Carolina Panthers, and Jason Sanders of the Miami Dolphins, with their longest kicks being 56 yards. In terms of field goals made between 1 and 19 yards, Harrison Butker led the league in field goals from there as he was 2 for 2. The 2020 NFL leader in field goals from 20 to 29 yards was Daniel Carlson, as he made all 18 of his field goals within that stretch. From 30 to 39, the leader would grow to be Graham Gano of the New York Giants and Greg Zuerlein of the Dallas Cowboys. They both went perfect. Graham Gano and Greg Zuerlein both went 13 for 13 in 16 games. In terms of field goals from 40 to 49 out, Dustin Hopkins of the Washington Redskins would make 13 of them. He would be 13 for 17, but Jason Myers would be 13 for 13 as he would take the crown for field goal kickers from 40 to 49 yards out. And the leader from 50 yards out would be Brandon McManus of the Denver Broncos, who made 10 of his 15 from 50 and beyond. And I think it's worth noting that the second place kicker in 50-yard field goals was Younghoe Ko, who was 8 for 8, who had the second most field goals made from that distance, and he was actually perfect. In terms of extra points made, the leader in extra points made was Mason Crosby of the Green Bay Packers, showing that the Packers scored a lot of touchdowns and he was able to convert a lot of extra points. Second in the league, tied for second in the league, was Will Lutz of the New Orleans Saints and Tyler Bass of the Buffalo Bills, both playoff teams. Fourth in the league, tied for fourth, would be Ryan Succop of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a playoff team, and Justin Tucker, the elite place kicker for the Baltimore Ravens, a playoff team. Sixth in the league would be Jason Myers of the Seattle Seahawks with 49 of them, playoff team. Seventh in the league would be Harrison Butker with 48 of them of the Kansas City Chiefs, playoff team. Eighth in the league will be Steven Gostkowski of the Tennessee Titans with as he would have 46 of them, playoff team. Ninth in the league would be Daniel Carson of the Las Vegas Raiders, who had 45 of them, not a playoff team. But 10th in the league would be Cody Parkey of the Cleveland Browns, who would have 43, along with Rodrigo Blankenship. Parkey did it in 15 games, whereas Rodrigo Blankenship did it in 16 games. But both those teams are playoff teams. And then looking at returning stats on the year, looking at kickoff touchdown leaders. There were no leaders in kickoff touchdowns, but there were 7 players that got kickoff return touchdowns on this season. They were Cordero Patterson of the Chicago Bears, Brandon Wilson of the Cincinnati Bengals, Byron Pringle of the Kansas City Chiefs, Devin Duvernay of the Baltimore Ravens, Isaiah Rodgers of the Indianapolis Colts, A.J. Brown of the Tennessee Titans, and CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys. And the punt return touchdowns of the season, there were only 8 of them on this season. And going down the list, it would be Deontay Spencer of the Denver Broncos, Jakeem Grant of the Miami Dolphins, Jamal Agnew of the Detroit Lions, Keenan Cole Sr. of the Jacksonville Jaguars, Isaiah McKenzie of the Buffalo Bills, Mecole Hardman of the Kansas City Chiefs, Jalen Reagor of the Philadelphia Eagles, and Gunnar Olszewski of the New England Patriots. And, of course, I'm reading this off of ESPN. So, of course, thank you once again to ESPN for all of that. But once again, that is how the 2020 NFL season is going to end. And of course, I'm going to get back with everyone I'm going to get back with another installment once the NFL awards are named. But with that said, my episodes from here on out regarding the 2020 NFL season are strictly the playoffs. But with that said, I want to thank everyone for following along with this with the Elite for this 2020 NFL season. It's been a long one. It's been pretty wild, especially a season where fans weren't everywhere in the stadium. So it was a very interesting year. It's going to be a year in sports that goes down in history, and I'm glad to have been here from the beginning of the season, which started around my 21st birthday. We were able to carry it on through as I was doing school, and we were able to make it all the way through. I was still able to do playoff pictures, stats, leaders. But just saying that this whole league has come a long way, and it's been a very impressive year. This will be a year that goes down in history, and I'm really thankful that you guys that you guys followed along. Thank you once again for listening to all 39 minutes of this piece, and for listening for the last 4 months. I hope all is well, and I will catch you with playoff installments of the Elite. Peace out. The 2020-2021 NFL season was a good one. Peace out.